entrainment and social interaction.
Wonderful to be here. Alexander mentioned when he did his introductions that RITMO was founded on a number of different centers, and one was on the musicological side, which he characterized as soft. I'll be soft today, but I'll spare you any graphs, but I'll play you a little bit of music. To the best of our knowledge, there are only a limited number of species that have a capacity for rhythmic entrainment, what is generally called beat perception synchronization. This capacity not only makes it possible for us to respond to the rhythmic movements of another, but it is behind the coordinated movement basic to dance and military drill. I would like to draw attention to two further cognitive capacities, vocal production learning and recursive pattern matching, that together with entrainment provide a basis for the way humans use patterned non-linguistic sound to shape social interactions. Part of my argument is that while rhythmic entrainment, vocal production learning, and recursive pattern matching are demonstrated by other species, the way humans recruit these capacities to use patterned non-linguistic sound to shape social interactions is unique within the animal kingdom. To understand vocal production learning, we have to begin with social learning. Social learning is a process through which behaviors are spread or maintained through an animal population. Of particular interest for our purposes is social learning that is focused on the imitation of sounds, what is generally called vocal learning. Vocal learning can take a number of forms. An animal may learn to use an innate signal in a new context, to rearrange innate signals to increase the animal's message repertoire, or to modify an innate signal after observing how a parent or peer uses signals. This last situation has come to be called production learning. The animal changes the way a sound is produced by modifying the way it uses various physiological systems. These systems include the respiratory system, the phonatory system. In mammals, that's the larynx; in birds, the syrinx, and various filtering systems, including the way the mouth is shaped to alter the sounds that are being produced. What is perhaps most striking, vocal production learning is relatively rare across the animal kingdom. It is generally agreed that only a small group of mammals, humans, bats, cetaceans, including dolphins and whales, pinnipeds, such as gray seals and harbor seals, and elephants, and three distantly related groups of birds, parrots, hummingbirds, and songbirds, have the capacity to modify innate signals in any significant way. What is remarkable then is that while other primates, including our closest current relatives, chimpanzees and bonobos, have significant capacities for social learning, they have at best a very limited capacity for vocal production learning. It is also known that our primate cousins have a very limited capacity for beat perception and synchronization. These two facts led Ani Patel to propose that vocal learning and entrainment were linked. As he observes, the evolution of vocal learning may have driven an especially high degree of auditory-motor integration in human brains because it requires a tight coupling between auditory input and motor input in order to match vocal production to a desired model. Even given that the two capacities might be linked, there is as yet no clear explanation for why vocal production learning and rhythmic entrainment emerged within only a limited group of species. One possibility, however, is offered by the fact that at least three of the species that have the capacity for vocal learning, cetaceans, elephants, and humans, are known to live in groups with complex social organizations. Within these species, the ability to shape and modify innate signals offers an important resource for negotiating and solidifying social relationships. Nonetheless, it has to be said that what we know about the social interactions of other species with the capacity for vocal learning is quite limited, and we know even less about the role rhythmic entrainment plays within such interactions. As such, we must proceed with caution. It could be that the capacities for vocal learning and rhythmic entrainment demonstrated by other species are key to the way these species shape social interactions. What we do know is that other species do not appear to use patterned non-linguistic sound with anything like the sophistication evident in human music making. To explain why this might be, let me turn to humans' capacity for recursive pattern matching and its relationship to analogical thought. The basic capacity for pattern matching, manifested both as recognizing that one phenomenon is similar to another and that both phenomena belong in the same category, is one that is widely distributed across the animal kingdom. The ability to recognize broader high-level patterns shared by two phenomena and to recursively exploit patterns within patterns is one that has a much more limited distribution. This ability is associated with a capacity for analogical thought, which is one of the distinctive aspects of human cognition. Let me take a moment to explore this capacity more fully, as I believe it provides a foundation for the way humans use patterned non-linguistic sound to shape social interaction. Let's start with basic similarity. A pen and a pencil, for example, are similar to each other both in appearance and in function, although the kind of marks these tools make on a writing surface will be different. Analogy takes as its point of departure similarity judgments of a more abstract sort. For example, a finger is analogous to a pen in that it is an approximately cylindrical structure that ends in a point. Unlike a pen or pencil, however, the finger leaves no discernible marks on the writing surface, and its cylinder is firmly attached to the larger structure of the hand. Making the analogy between a pen and a finger, then, involves drawing structural correlations between the two. The cylindrical shape of the pen maps onto the shape of the digits of the finger, and the point of the pen maps onto the tip of the finger. With the analogy in place, we can imagine using a finger to write or a pen as an extension of our hand. Note that analogy is not simply about correlating aspects of one phenomenon with aspects of another, basic pattern matching, but about mapping relationships between phenomena. Indeed, it is often described as concerned with relations among relations, or second-order relations. In the analogy between a pen and a finger, for instance, the relationship between pen and finely tapered device for delivering ink, that is, the tip of the pen, is correlated with the relationship between finger and tapered appendage for guiding communication. Analogy, then, is a highly sophisticated form of pattern matching that exploits patterns within and across patterns, making it possible to correlate aspects of quite disparate phenomena and to use these correlations to guide reasoning and inference. As I've shown in other work, it is analogy that is in play when sequences of musical sound are used to represent everything from the chaos before creation, to a sunrise, to the dark emotions of lament, to the steps of a march. Allow me to offer two short musical excerpts to illustrate such representations. Said I'd play some music. One might well associate O'Carolan's Captain O'Kane with a somber emotion, and indeed it is typically taken to be a lament by the blind harpist for a friend who had fallen on hard times. It is important to note, however, that when I recorded the piece, I was not in a sorrowful mood, and it seems doubtful that O'Carolan was prostrate with grief when he composed the tune. Instead, the slow tempo, the stops and starts of the tune, and the gesture toward the relative major before collapse back into the minor mode all provide sonic analogs for contemplative, negatively valenced emotion process. Jonssen's Hegsetzer Brudmarsch, by contrast, invites rhythmic entrainment, but you may have noticed that the tread it establishes is a relatively deliberate one, suitable for a march that is both dignified and festive. Here, the periodic structure of the music provides a sonic analog for the steps of the march, while the dotted rhythms and rapid divisions in the strings offer an analog for the positive valence emotions that might be experienced on such an occasion. More generally, analogy offers a resource for rhythmic entrainment outside of the auditory domain. Just as patterns and sequences of musical sound can be correlated with kinesthetic patterns, the rhythmic patterns of the Hagsetra Brudmarsch evoking the steps of the bridal march, kinesthetic or visual patterns could be correlated with auditory phenomena. For humans and for other species with capacities for recursive pattern matching, then, rhythmic entrainment can manifest in multifarious ways. On their own, the capacities for rhythmic entrainment and vocal production learning cannot explain why humans came to use pattern non-linguistic sound to shape social interaction, nor, for that matter, can a capacity for the kind of recursive pattern matching that serves as a basis for analogical thought. Put another way, why did humans develop music and other species did not? Questions like these lead us into the domain of just so stories. Two facts can, however, limit the scope of the stories we tell ourselves about the development of music. First, we see the capacities for rhythmic entrainment and vocal production learning and recursive pattern matching in only a limited number of species. Second, human success as a species is based on our ability to cooperate with one another. Individually, after all, we could not hunt large mammals, develop agriculture, or bring the very planet we occupy to its knees. Michael Tomasello has made a compelling argument for a two-stage process which led to our species' success. First, early human individuals, before the emergence of Homo sapiens, began to collaborate with one another in face-to-face interactions to pursue collaborative goals. Such collaborations led to more efficient foraging and eventually to the hunting of large mammals, and were predicated on developing skills to communicate about joint goals and ways to achieve them. Second, modern humans, early Homo sapiens sapiens, came to form distinct cultural groups, each pursuing its own collective goals within its own cultural practices. The formation of such groups helped to stabilize the communication skills that facilitated collaboration and provided a means of gathering together individuals who shared the same goals. The development of language as a tool for communication was certainly key here, but I would like to submit that making use of pattern non-linguistic sound to represent emotion processes, as well as communicative gestures in the pattern movements of groups of individuals, was important for the formation and maintenance of cultural groups. After all, as we know from our own experience, and as we've heard quite a bit at today's workshop already, participating in emotion processes that are shared with others or engaging in the coordinated movements of dance can promote feelings of group membership. As has been noted, a capacity for rhythmic entrainment has been documented in only a limited number of species. This capacity may be linked to vocal production learning, which again is present in only a limited number of species. I've proposed today that one reason these capacities may have developed is to facilitate, negotiate, and solidify social relationships. I further propose that the capacity for recursive pattern matching, which provides a basis for analogical thought, allowed humans to move beyond the basic interactions afforded by rhythmic entrainment and vocal learning through using pattern non-linguistic sound to represent emotion processes, physical gestures, and the pattern movements of dance. This then provided a resource for early humans to form and maintain cultural groups that were key to successful social collaboration. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions from the audience for Lawrence?
Many questions. I really appreciate this focus on the recursive pattern matching as a mechanism that's essential to the development of something like music. In your example of the guitar playing, nice guitar playing, by the way, I'm wondering about that gap between when music is genuinely expressive and when it is emotionally demonstrative, and whether you see what the transition would be between that, because there are situations in which musical behaviors are genuinely conveying, the performer's state, and there's tons of examples where it doesn't really matter anymore. But that would be something that would have to develop some kind of separation within maybe individuals as well as kind of evolutionarily. So,
thanks. If I understand the question correctly, then it's sort of like music that we read out as expressive and musical performances that are really emotionally moving.
How about people using musical behaviors to express their emotions, and that somehow growing into music having referential capacity for emotion.
Okay, I think I get that. First off, I would want to put just one little layer there, which is to say that what is actually happening is that the listener is interpreting a sound sequence as emotionally expressive in some way or another. Inasmuch as you could imagine a highly skilled performers, such as the ones you were working with, rendering a musically moving passage and maybe being kind of angry in some way. In other words, there does not have to be a direct match between that. And then there are certainly practices within cultural groups that will read emotions in pretty fine-grained ways. And Martin Clayton, who in a very ad hoc study some years ago just looked at listeners both within India and also within the UK listening to the same rag. And both listeners were able to get some of the same emotional things out. But if I recall, and again, this was a very informal study in many ways, but as I recall, the match was approximate in both cases. And I would actually, and have argued that it was analogical, that was what was happening in that way. We can talk more, because I don't think I completely answered the question, but that was a first approximation. Martin, since I've invoked you.
Okay, we also have one in the YouTube, I'll just say it now,
Okay.
because it came in earlier. How would you differentiate language and music evolutionally? From Runa Ya.
I do that with a fairly crude tool, although it's a relatively new one, which is language for me involves what C.S. Peirce called symbolic reference, where you have arbitrary symbols that are correlated for reference, whereas music involves what I call analogical reference, where there has to be a conformance between the sign and the thing to which it refers. Generally, that's in the class of what Peirce called icons, but I break that down a little bit more. So language uses almost exclusively, but not completely, uses symbolic reference, whereas music uses almost exclusively, but not completely, analogical reference. That's the way. And again, it's a little bit more complicated discussion, but we can actually see that there are substantial differences there, especially because in expressing themselves, humans can use analogical reference. Prosody, there's been a lot of interesting work on that. Prosody is one place where that comes up. Martin.
Oh my God. Thanks for the paper, Larry, and thanks for squeezing the Clayton citation into the question and answer session. But I didn't want to pick up on my own work, as it were, but try to turn some thoughts into something resembling a question. Now, when I think of the human capacity for entrainment, generating social bonding, social identities, culture, etc., sort of archetypal examples I would go to would tend to involve something more like participatory musical performances, people dancing together, people playing drums together, people chanting together, whatever. And it seems to me that, so the first example you played of your beautiful guitar playing seems to be very far away from that, because in that case you have a solo performer presenting this tune, and as a listener to that music, maybe all sorts of things are working, including entrainment. And I'm following the beats somehow. It is a metrical piece. I'm also maybe thinking in terms of how that would be a song. There's something vocal behind it. Can I imagine a vocal performance behind that? All those things maybe go into my interpretation of an emotional content of that. It still seems it seems like a very different thing to me, and I wonder to what extent can we talk about a story of musical evolution as opposed to two quite different, or two different streams which interact in a way. In other words, people drumming and moving together and making noise together and entraining is a different thing from the solo vocal production, which is encoding emotion. And what we're really talking about in musical evolution is how those two things get intertwined with one another.
Thank you. That's a really good question, Martin. My answer would be to actually look at those So first off, to admit that there could be two different streams. Again, I am learning a lot through this particular workshop, so I'm happy to entertain that possibility. My own thinking has been to think of those two things as along a continuum. Not the least because getting everyone to move together is one way to start to bring emotion processes into a state of harmony, and to do those sorts of things. And again, that bringing emotion processes into harmony, especially if you think of early social groups trying to bond, that would be something very important. Incidentally, all of your examples are very good, but I've also thought, well, what about the ones that are not as directly musical? But as Kofi Agawu talks about in the opening of his African rhythm book, there's all sorts of rhythms that are within daily life, and they can be with different forms of working together may involve those rhythms. And of course, we see then with sea shanties a crossover between those sorts of things. But back to the point about emotion, I'm actually there thinking that whereas there's not beat perception synchronization in terms of what Ani Patel and others have talked about with that, that's less prominent there. I do believe that there can be those same latent processes of entraining, but not less rhythmically and more in terms of emotion processes within that. And so that's why I, at least in my naive state here, I'm thinking about those as being more along a continuum rather than being a sharp break. But if in fact research shows that there are in fact two streams, I will be happy to reconsider that and think about how I might better answer that question.
Thank you so much for such a stimulating discussion and talk. This now concludes this session, so give it a round of applause again.
Thank you.